she sang to the man everyone had forgotten and asked, "Why do you care?" But it wasn't just kindness, it was blood. Because the janitor in the dark wasn't just a nurse, she was his father's buried secret. And now, the truth could tear everything apart. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The night shift at Silver Grove Rehabilitation Center was quiet, except for the hum of distant machines and the soft creak of Lena Cruz's sneakers as she moved down the hall. Her cart squeaked with every turn, carrying warm cloths, a book of poetry, and a small speaker playing lullabies in Spanish. It was almost midnight, her favorite hour, the time when the world fell silent enough for the soul to sleep. Room 9 was at the very end of the east wing, tucked away beside a window overlooking a withering garden. It was also where William Ashcroft lay, motionless, day after day. The staff had stopped believing he'd wake up, but Lena hadn't. She entered softly, as always, dimming the light to a gentle amber. William's face was pale, his lips slightly parted, his expression frozen, as if caught between two worlds. Lena didn't flinch. She placed her hand gently on his arm and whispered. She pulled the rocking chair close to his bed, sat down, and opened the same weathered book of poems she'd read every night for the last month. Tonight, it was Neruda. "I do not love you as if you were salt rose or topaz," she read, her voice low and warm. As she read, she noticed it again, just a flicker, almost imperceptible. His fingers twitched, barely, but it was there. Her heart lifted like it did every time. She pressed on, reading another stanza, then began to sing, her voice barely above a whisper, a lullaby her abuela had once sung to her when life felt too heavy. She looked up, and the monitor stayed steady, unchanging. Still, she kept going. To everyone else, William Ashcroft was just a name on a file, former CEO of Ashcroft International, a powerful man now reduced to silence and stillness. But to Lena, he was something else. Not just a patient, but a story waiting to be remembered. Someone's father, someone's soul still listening behind closed eyes. "Did you know today would have been my father's birthday?" she said softly, though she wasn't sure why she was sharing it. "He died without a voice, too. I guess that's why I keep coming back." In the hallway, unseen by her, a figure stood motionless. William Ashcroft hadn't meant to come tonight. He'd flown in on a late jet, half a world away from boardrooms and contracts. All he wanted was a few minutes to sit in silence, alone with the man he both resented and loved. But what he found instead was a woman, not in scrubs, not rushing like the others, but sitting at his father's bedside as though she belonged there. He stayed hidden behind the doorframe, listening. Lena stroked the back of William's hand gently and closed the book. "Same time tomorrow?" she whispered with a small smile. She packed up her things slowly, then paused to press a soft kiss to her fingertips and brush them against the man's temple. She turned to leave, pushing the cart into the hallway, and nearly collided into Damien. Startled, she froze. He didn't speak right away. His expression was unreadable. He wore a crisp black coat and a tie too tight at the neck. His hair was slicked back, his features sharp, like stone that had never known softness. But his voice, when he finally spoke, was low and searching. "Why do you care?" Lena blinked, caught off guard by the question. She looked back toward room 9, then met his eyes. "Because someone has to," she said, her voice steady but quiet. And then she walked past him, not waiting for a reply. Damien remained in the hallway long after Lena disappeared into the shadows of the east wing. Her words echoed in his chest, simple, but with a weight he couldn't shake. "Because someone has to," he turned back to room 9 and stepped inside for the first time in weeks. The room felt different now, not because anything had changed physically, but because it carried her presence. A faint scent of lavender, a folded blanket at the foot of the bed, a copy of the poetry book on the nightstand, a draw page marked with a dried rose. Damien approached his father's bedside and looked down at the man who had once commanded boardrooms with thunder in his voice. Now, William Ashcroft lay still, silent, almost fragile. Damien swallowed hard. "You've got people reading Neruda to you now," he whispered, trying to sound amused. "Didn't think you'd go soft on me." He sat, reluctantly. "I didn't come here for her," he added quickly, though no one had asked. "I came because I needed to see what's left." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Something about the woman's voice had pulled him in. The way she looked at his father, like he wasn't a burden, like he wasn't gone. The next morning, Lena returned to her shift as usual. She never expected recognition, and certainly not a second encounter. But as she passed room 9 with her cart, she was surprised to find the door open and the curtains pulled back to reveal sunlight streaming in. Something she always wished they'd do. Damien was inside again. He looked up when she paused at the threshold. "If you back," she said, startled. "He never left," he replied, then softened. "Figuratively, anyway." She hovered, unsure. "I'm just here to check vitals." He nodded and stepped aside. She approached William's bedside with her usual grace, murmuring a quiet greeting to him, as if nothing had changed. But something had. As she worked, Damien watched her closely. "Do you really think he hears you?" Lena glanced at him. "I know he does." "Do you believe that, even now?" She smiled gently. "Especially now." Damien let the silence stretch. Then he said, "Most people see weakness in moments like these. You see a chance to care. That's rare." Lena didn't respond to the compliment. Instead, she adjusted the blanket and tucked it beneath William's arms. Everyone needs to be remembered as more than their silence. He studied her. "What's your name?" She turned to him. Lena Cruz." "You've been reading poetry to him? Singing?" She nodded. "Every night." He hesitated. "Why Neruda?" She paused. "Because grief listens in verse, and sometimes love does too." Damien didn't have a reply to that. He stood by the window, watching his father, his jaw clenched. Finally, he said, "He was never good at expressing anything. Not to me, not even to my mother. Maybe that's why this feels foreign." Lena glanced at him. "Then maybe this is his second chance." Damien's eyes flickered. "You think people like him deserve one?" "Inside, I think everyone does," she replied softly, then wheeled her cart back into the hallway, leaving him with that answer and the weight of what it might mean. Later that evening, Lena returned to room 9. Again, the night shift had begun, and as she sang that familiar lullaby, Damien stood in the doorway once more, this time not hiding. And William's finger twitched. Again. The morning after Damien Ashcroft's unexpected visit, whispers ran wild through Silver Grove Rehabilitation Center. But it wasn't the billionaire heir who had surprised them. The request went that night nurse, one orderly muttered. "You mean Lena?" another responded, raising an eyebrow. "Why her?" The official memo confirmed it. Effective immediately, only Nurse Lena Cruz was permitted to enter room 9. No other staff, no day nurse replacements, not even the director of patient services. It was unorthodox, it was commanding, and it came directly from Damien Ashcroft himself. Lena stood frozen when her supervisor delivered the news. He said, "Your presence calmed Mr. Ashcroft. That you were the first person he'd responded to in weeks." "I didn't do anything special," she said quickly, trying to hide the flush in her cheeks. "You sat by him when no one else bothered," her supervisor replied. "That matters." Reluctantly, Lena accepted. She didn't like attention, but if William was responding, even a little, she wasn't going to step away now. That evening, when she stepped into room 9 again, the air felt heavier, not because of fear, but because she knew someone was watching. Damien. He didn't say anything at first, just stood by the window with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the man in the bed. Lena tried to ignore him and moved gently toward William. She took his hand, humming the soft tune she always did, the one her grandmother used to sing when nights got too long. Then she opened a leather-bound poetry book. "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" she began, but stopped abruptly. William's fingers twitched. Her eyes widened. She looked at him again, unsure if it had been real. She waited a moment, then read another line. The twitch came again, a small squeeze. She glanced toward Damien, who had moved closer, watching with cautious hope. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt. He just observed with the intensity of someone seeing something impossible unfold. Later, outside the room, Damien walked beside her down the hallway. "What you're doing, it's working," he said. Lena shook her head. "It might just be reflexes. False hope can be cruel." "You believe, don't you?" She hesitated. "I believe in trying, especially when everyone else stops." He studied her face, then added, "I want to make sure you're taken care of. I can triple your salary, cover transportation, move you closer to the facility." "I'm not here for money," she said gently. He blinked. "Everyone's here for something." Here for him? Answer unsettled him. Not because it was ungrateful, but because it was pure. That night, Lena returned to her tiny apartment at the edge of town. The paint on the walls was faded, and the heater made an awful rattling noise. But it was home. She hung her coat by the door and moved to a drawer in the back of her closet. From it, she pulled a small photo album and flipped it open. Tucked between the pages was a photograph. Old, sun-faded. A girl, no older than 7, sat on a wooden swing, laughing. Next to her, pushing the swing, was a man in a crisp button-up shirt and aviator sunglasses. The caption in faded ink read, "Summer, 1999, Lake Marin." Her fingers traced the edge of the picture. She whispered, "You don't remember me, do you?" In the background, a soft knock came from the walls. A pipe settling, perhaps, but to Lena, it echoed like the past coming home. And the next few days at Silver Grove passed in hushed wonder. Lena's shifts became sacred. Other staff adjusted their routines to avoid crossing into Room 9's threshold. It was clear now, William Ashcroft wasn't just observing. He was trusting her, singularly, with his father. Each night, Lena arrived with her same calm presence. She brought poems, music, and once, even a small lavender plant to place on the windowsill. Every gesture was quiet, deliberate, and rooted in something much deeper than duty. Damien visited often now, always at the edges, never interfering, just watching. Sometimes he would sit beside her, hands clasped together, his usual boardroom coldness thawing with each breath his father took. He noticed how Lena always... Then, one evening, William's hand tightened firmly around hers. Lena gasped. She looked up to see William's eyes flutter open for a brief second before closing again. A tear slipped down her cheek. She looked to Damien, who stood frozen in the doorway. "Still in there," she whispered, trembling. "He's trying..." The moment shifted something between them. Damien stepped forward, kneeling beside the bed, his voice raw. "Dad, it's me. Damien, I'm here." There was no answer, but Lena didn't need one. Progress like that was everything. Later, in the break room, Damien slid a bottle of water across the table toward her. "You're not like the others," he said. Remember to meet his glow. Knowing what she replied, just closer. Closer to what? Remembering who he was before the world forgot. Damien's eyes darkened. "I didn't visit for months. I was angry. He wasn't perfect, but he was always strong." Lena looked down. "We all fall. What matters is who reaches down to lift us again." That night, Damien returned to his penthouse downtown, a place filled with steel, glass, and silence. The city buzzed outside his windows, but he barely noticed. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop, curiosity nagging at him. He typed Lena's name into the search. Nothing unusual came up. No criminal records, no scandals. Just a quiet, clean digital footprint. But one document caught his eye. An archive staff directory from Ashcroft Family Foundation, circa 2008. Listed under pediatric summer volunteers. A name, Lena Cruz, age 15. His heartbeat quickened. That summer, that year, his father had run the Lakeside program for underprivileged children. They had hosted dozens of kids, offering shelter, food, and safety for a season. Damien scrolled through the photos, and there she was. Lena, younger but unmistakable, braided hair, laughing as she helped paint a garden wall. Standing beside her in several photos, his father, smiling proudly, his hand resting on her small shoulder like she belonged there. He leaned back in his chair, stunned. She hadn't just known his father, she had once been a part of their lives, woven into a memory his own family had long forgotten. The next morning, Lena entered room 9 with her usual gentleness, but when she stepped out into the hall, Damien was waiting. He didn't say anything right away, just handed her an old photo printed in color. Lena stared at it, her lips parting. It was one she hadn't seen in years. Damien watched her reaction closely. "That summer, you were there." Lena nodded slowly. "Your father saved me once. That's why I can't walk away now." And in that moment, the story shifted. Not just between patient and nurse, but between a girl once forgotten and a legacy finally remembering her worth. The next few days were quiet, but only on the surface. Beneath the polished halls of Silver Grove Rehabilitation Center, questions stirred like currents beneath still water. William Ashcroft couldn't shake the feeling that Lena Cruz was more than she let on. Not just a devoted caregiver or an unusually intuitive woman. There was something missing, or maybe something hidden. On the 4th morning, while sitting in his office, Damien made a call to his assistant, Reagan. "I need you to run a background check," he said, voice low. "Name's Lena Cruz, lives downtown, works nights, at Silver Grove." Reagan was used to these requests. "Looking for dirt?" "No worries," Damien murmured. "Looking for the missing pieces." A few hours later, a file landed in Damien's inbox. He opened it quickly. No criminal record, no arrests, no lawsuits. Just a straight, clean paper trail. Too clean. Her high school records were intact, but there were gaps after that. No college listed. No employment prior to Silver Grove. Just a 6-year void. He tapped the desk absently, staring at the timeline. From age 20 to 26, nothing. Damien leaned back, brows furrowed. Whatever she had gone through during those years, she wasn't advertising it, and he wasn't about to pry it. That evening, he returned to Silver Grove again. Room 9 was dimly lit, as always. Lena sat beside William, her hand gently guiding his. A pen was cradled in his weak fingers, moving slowly over a whiteboard. His movements were shaky, barely forming anything legible, but she encouraged him with patience that never wavered. "Try again," she whispered. "Just like last night. You're stronger today." Damien watched silently, arms crossed. After several long minutes, William's hand stopped. On the whiteboard, in uneven strokes, were the letters. "One day, I wrote her name on a piece of paper, assigned to her." Lena froze for a moment. Then, with a soft smile, she wiped it away gently and leaned in closer. "You did beautifully tonight." As she stood to leave, Damien followed her out into the hallway. "For me, Mercy," he said. "Why that word?" Lena didn't look at him. "Maybe it's a prayer," she said quietly. "Maybe it's guilt." Damien studied her. "You knew him before, didn't you?" She finally met his eyes. "Once, a long time ago." "What happened?" Lena's voice dropped. "Nothing I can change now?" She turned and walked down the hall, leaving Damien with more questions than answers. That night, Lena sat on her narrow couch in her tiny apartment. The walls were thin, and the hum of a neighbor's TV buzzed faintly through the air. Her small coffee table was littered with papers and old notebooks. But what she pulled out from beneath the floorboard was different. A worn manila envelope. Inside, folded carefully, was a torn letter with fading ink. It was signed, Isabel Ashcroft. Muttered. Lena noticed her fingers along the familiar curves of the signature. She pulled out her birth certificate next, worn at the edges, creased from being folded too often. Name, Lena Mercy Ashcroft. She whispered it under her breath, the name she hadn't spoken aloud in over 2 decades. Her mother's words in the letter blurred with memory. "Anything ever happens to me, go to Silver Grove. He may not know the truth, but he was once kind. Mercy will remind him." Lena pressed the letter to her chest. That name, that word William had written. He remembered. Or at least some part of him did. She looked at the framed photo nearby, her mother holding her on a beach, sun-soaked and smiling. The Ashcroft legacy had been one of silence, but now that silence was cracking. And the truth, buried under years of shame and secrecy, was beginning to surface. The next morning, Lena entered room 9 carrying a fresh stack of poetry books. She always brought something new, to her mother's herbs, word and jiroga aloud in the garden. William's eyes flicked toward the books, just briefly, but Lena noticed. She noticed everything. She began softly. When you are old and gray and full of sleep, and nodding by the fire, take down this book. As she read, William's fingers shifted faintly against the blanket. His mouth twitched, not quite a word, but closer than before. Lena kept reading, her voice barely above a whisper, and as always, she finished by singing an old lullaby. Her mother used to sing it when storms frightened her as a child. But beautifully. That song always made the tremble in William's hands ease. She didn't look up to see Damien standing in the hallway again. After her shift ended, Lena stepped outside to find Damien leaning against his car. "Walk with me," he said. She hesitated, then nodded. They walked the perimeter of the center in silence for a while. Then Damien spoke. "You said you knew my father once. How?" Lena's reply was quiet. "You wouldn't believe me." "Try me," she exhaled. "My mother, Isabel, she was your father's wife." Damien stopped walking. "That's not possible." She was his first wife, before the world knew him as William Ashcroft, the mogul. She died when I was 10. Damien was silent. The wind carried the faint scent of lavender from the garden beds nearby. "You never mentioned a daughter," he said finally. "We wouldn't," Lena replied. "Not after what happened. He didn't raise me. He vanished from my life after my mother passed. No letters, no visits. Just..." Damien's jaw tightened. "And now you're here, caring for him?" "I didn't come here for revenge," Lena said quickly. "I needed a job, but when I saw the name on the room, William Ashcroft, I nearly collapsed." Damien studied her face. "You knew it was him right away. Still, you stayed." Lena looked away, "Because I wanted to see if there was anything left of the man my mother once loved. Anything left worth forgiving." Damien ran a hand through his hair, stunned. "You're my sister?" "Half-sister," she corrected gently. "But I didn't come here to ruin your name or the company. I just needed to see if he remembered me. Or if maybe, even in his silence, he still had a soul." They stood in silence. Finally, Damien asked, "And the word he wrote, mercy, that wasn't random?" Lena shook her head. "That was the name my mother gave me before she died. Elena Mercy Ashcroft." Damien looked away, shaken. The name echoed in his mind like a ghost he never knew was haunting him. That evening, back in his office, Damien opened the family archives. Old photos, marriage records, estate documents, things he had never bothered to read closely before. There it was, a marriage certificate between William Ashcroft and Isabel Marin, dated 3 years before his own birth. And there, in one creased photo tucked behind the paperwork, was a young girl in pigtails sitting on William's lap. Her face was unmistakable. Elena. The truth was no longer buried. The next day, Damien returned to room 9. He knelt beside his father, whose eyes slowly drifted toward him. "No," Damien said softly. "She's your daughter." William blinked once. A tear slid from the corner of his eye. Damien took his hand. "You're not alone anymore, old man, and neither is she." Damien's hands trembled slightly as he laid out the faded family photos across the mahogany desk in his father's study. His jaw clenched as he stared at one particular image. William Ashcroft, years younger, in a sunlit garden with a woman in nurse's scrubs. Her hair was dark, her eyes kind. Cradled in her arms was a baby girl. "Tell me I'm wrong," Damien said softly as Lena stepped into the room. She froze, her eyes scanning the photos. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. Slowly, she stepped closer. She stepped closer, but no words forming. "Found these in a private archive," Damien said, "tucked inside a trust box registered to my father. This isn't just some rumor, is it?" Lena looked away, her fingers curled into her palms. "Was your mother," he said flatly. "Wasn't she?" Lena nodded, barely. "Her name was Maria Santos. She was a nurse here. They fell in love when he was separated from your mother. She got pregnant. But the Ashcroft family, your grandparents, threatened everything. Your mother came back and the affair was buried. They offered her silence or Damien took a step back, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "I had no idea." "You weren't meant to," Lena replied. Her voice was even, but her throat was tight. "They made sure I never belonged." Damien stared at her, the weight of the truth settling. "So, we're siblings?" Lena shook her head. "No, I'm William's daughter. But I'm not your sister. I'm not an Ashcroft, not in the way they define it." "You've been here all this time," Damien murmured, right beside him, "and no one knew?" "You didn't come for a name," Lena whispered, "or revenge. I came because I wanted to see if the man who abandoned my mother was even human." She sighed. Lena looked through the glass window toward room 9. A man trapped in silence, regret, and pain. Damien didn't respond. For a long moment they stood in the quiet. Later that night, Lena sat beside William again. The monitors beeped softly, the lights were low. She took his hand, as she always did, her fingers curling gently around his. "Papa," she whispered, "he knows now. He knows everything." William's fingers twitched. Lena looked up. His eyelids fluttered. Slowly, slowly, they opened just a fraction. "Papa," she breathed. His gaze was blurry, unfocused, but it settled on her. A single tear slipped from the corner of his eye. And then, barely visible, his lips parted. A soundless shape, her name. She broke. Her body curled over the bed rail as quiet sobs shook her. "Now, here for your fortune," she cried. "I just wanted to know if you ever thought of us, of her, of me." William's hand lifted, slowly, shakily. It rested on hers. It was the first time in 25 years she felt his warmth. The warmth of a father who was never allowed to be one. The next morning, the mood in Silver Grove was different. The staff had noticed something had changed in room 9. William had opened his eyes, he'd moved his hand. It was the first time in weeks. But for Lena, it wasn't the movement that shook her. It was the recognition. Word spread quickly, and by mid-morning, Damien was back, standing outside the doorway of his father's room, watching silently as Lena adjusted William's blanket, gently humming the same lullaby she'd sung since the first night. He waited until she stepped out before he spoke. "You're not just his daughter," Damien said. "You've been his anchor." Lena gave him a tired glance. "It's not that simple." "No," he admitted. "And I won't pretend to understand what you've lived through. But you deserve more than silence. He owes you more than a touch of a hand." Lena let out a soft breath. "He was kept from us. My mother, she never stopped loving him. But she was proud, too proud to accept what the Ashcrofts tried to offer in exchange for silence. Offered her money? They offered her invisibility, a promise that we'd be left alone if we stayed forgotten." Ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched on his face. "That's not a legacy, that's a stain." Lena looked down the hallway. "She died cleaning floors in a hospice. I started working young, changed my last name to Cruz, and I swore no one would ever know I was an Ashcroft. 2 years later, here you are," Damien said quietly, "still carrying this. Alone." "Alone," she whispered. "Not anymore." A silence settled between them. Damien took a step closer. "He'll need long-term care, and—" "I'm not leaving him," Lena said instantly. "I didn't come here by accident. I chose this place because I knew, I hoped, one day he'd see me." Damien nodded. I want to help. I want to fix this. She studied him, really looked at him. Why? Because if we're anything alike, he said, then maybe you're the only one in this family worth calling family. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned back toward room 9, where William's eyes were now open again, blinking slowly at the light. Damien stepped inside for the first time in days and approached his father's bed. William turned his head, slightly, and met his son's eyes. There was recognition there, and shame. And then, he looked past Damien, to Lena. She moved closer. He lifted one hand, trembling, and she reached out, clasping it again. Damien saw something then he hadn't seen before. Not a patient and a nurse, but a father and the daughter he had once lost. Later that night, alone in her apartment, Lena opened the drawer and took out the torn letter again. Her mother's handwriting was soft and slanted. Elena, I don't know if your father will ever get to know you, but you are made of both his fire and my faith. Never bear your name out of shame. One day it will bloom. Tears traced down her cheeks. She whispered, maybe that day is today. Outside, Silver Grove glowed in the distance, quiet and still. Inside room 9, William slept peacefully, for the first time in years, with Lena's hand still resting on his. The room was silent, except for the soft hiss of the oxygen machine. William Ashcroft, once a titan of industry, now lay frail in his hospital bed, eyes fluttering as if trying to grasp time he had long left behind. Lena stood by his side, gently wiping sweat from his brow. For days now he had tried to speak, managing only breathy syllables and incomplete murmurs. But this time, his fingers clenched around hers with urgency. Lawyer, he whispered, each syllable raspy as though it had been dragged across gravel. Lena froze. You want your lawyer? She asked softly, unsure if she'd heard right. He nodded, barely. The movement was slight but deliberate. Word spread fast. Within hours, his longtime attorney, Mr. Caldwell, arrived. He was a polished man in his 60s, with silver hair and a briefcase always tightly locked. Lena stood back, uneasy, as he entered room 9. Behind him, Damien watched, arms crossed. William tried to sit up, but Caldwell gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Easy, sir. Just speak when you can. With painstaking slowness, William raised a trembling hand and gestured toward the notepad on the nightstand. Lena handed it to him without a word. He scrawled, shaky, jagged, but unmistakable. She is mine. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. Do you wish to make changes to your estate, Mr. Ashcroft? William nodded. The motion left him breathless, but his eyes, sharp with purpose, said everything. That afternoon, the Ashcroft Holdings board caught wind of the development. The old guard, Damien's uncles, tightly wound men in tailored suits, met in a private conference room on the top floor of the corporate tower. Acceptable, snapped Charles Ashcroft, the oldest of William's brothers. She's a nurse, a girl who didn't even bear our name until last month. Be an opportunist, another uncle spat. We must freeze the estate, file an injunction if necessary. Damien stood at the edge of the room, listening in silence. He hadn't said much since Lena's confession, hadn't returned her calls, hadn't spoken to her directly. His world had shifted violently, and he'd chosen to stand still in the wreckage. The next morning, the tabloids erupted. Secret history? Nurse or gold digger? William Ashcroft cry, Queen Lady Court. The images splashed across front pages, photos of Lena leaving the rehab center, one of her younger self clutching a baby doll, grainy and invasive. Online commenters tore her apart. Lena sat in her tiny apartment, the curtains drawn, fingers trembling as she held the tabloid in her lap. She wasn't crying. She'd shed all the tears she had years ago in another hospital hallway, but her heart ached for a different reason now. It ached because she had hoped, even for a second, that maybe William's recognition would be quiet, sacred, not turned into headlines and boardroom chaos. She was wrong. That evening, Damien finally appeared at her door. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, hands in his coat pockets, looking like a man who hadn't slept. When he did speak, it wasn't angry, but it wasn't warm either. Why? Didn't you tell me sooner? He asked. I didn't come here for money or revenge, Lena said. I came because your father was alone. Damien looked down at the floor. Then why stay this long? Lena's voice softened. Because someone had to care. He didn't reply, just nodded slowly, then turned and left. But the next morning, everything changed. Inside the Ashcroft boardroom, chaos erupted. William, wheeled in by a nurse, sat upright with Caldwell by his side. With quivering fingers, he handed over his updated will. Lena stood behind him, still in her nurse scrubs. I hereby appoint Lena Cruz as co-healthcare proxy, Caldwell read aloud. And I request a clause recognizing her as my legal daughter and heir. Shouting broke out instantly. You can't be serious. She's not of sound mind. It's manipulation. But William lifted a hand, his first firm gesture in weeks, and stared directly at his brothers. The room fell into stunned silence. The silence that followed William's gesture was unnerving, like a storm that hadn't decided whether to break or pass. Charles Ashcroft was the first to speak, his voice brittle with fury. You're letting a stranger rewrite your legacy, William. She's not a stranger, Damien said quietly, eyes locked on his father. You know that now. But Charles ignored him, turning to Caldwell. This isn't legal. He's barely coherent. This entire document can be contested. Caldwell adjusted his glasses. Mr. Ashcroft is of sound mind. His physician has signed the competency certificate. We followed protocol. Protocol? Charles hissed. He's putting our company, our family, at the mercy of some nurse who claims to be his daughter. Damien stepped forward. She didn't claim anything. You found her out. You hunted her story like vultures. Now you're defending her? Charles snapped. Damien, don't be a fool. She'll gut this company for sympathy points and disappear with your father's money. Damien's voice was low but unwavering. She never asked for a dime. William moved again, just slightly, but enough to draw every gaze back to him. He lifted his pen and wrote in large, jagged letters on the boardroom notepad. She stayed. Caldwell cleared his throat. If there are no legal objections to file within 72 hours, the updated will shall stand. The board murmured among themselves, some livid, others confused, but all aware that public perception had shifted. Lena's story, though sensationalized in headlines, was gaining traction. Reporters were beginning to paint her not as a gold digger, but as a devoted nurse, a quiet woman who never spoke out, never cashed in. Later that evening, Lena sat alone in the hospital garden, beneath a dim lamppost, trying to process the firestorm that had erupted around her. She hadn't spoken to William since the will reading. Part of her feared he would regret it, that he had acted out of guilt, or pressure, or pain. Not love. The soft sound of wheels on gravel broke the quiet. She looked up to see William's nurse pushing him toward her. He stopped a few feet away and motioned for the nurse to leave. Lena rose slowly. You should be resting. William shook his head, eyes glistening. With trembling effort, he raised his hand and pointed to the night sky. His lips moved, almost imperceptibly. Lena leaned in close. Stars, he whispered. She nodded. They're beautiful tonight. His hand fell toward hers, landing gently. He squeezed, not tightly, but with enough strength to feel real. Then, with difficulty, he raised a finger and traced a shape on her palm. A circle. And another. Then, a wobbly heart. Tears sprang to Lena's eyes. She pressed his hand to her cheek and closed her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. The next day, headlines changed tone. Ashcroft. Harris or Angel in Scrubs. Stayed. The story of Lena Cruz and Room 9. And then, for the first time in weeks, William Ashcroft released a public statement through Caldwell. Life has been marked by success, but also by silence. The greatest thing I ever did was fail someone who should have been at my side. I am trying now, too late, but not without meaning, to be a father. Lena Cruz is not a stranger, she is my daughter. And she saved me. The internet exploded. Support poured in. Old friends of William's wife wrote in with letters of remembrance. One former nurse even posted a photograph of Lena, as a child, sitting beside William's wife in the hospital garden. The caption read, "She was always..." Meanwhile, in the rehab center, Lena returned to room 9. She brought William a copy of the article. He couldn't read it fully, but she pointed to the photo on the front page, her as a child in the woman who once loved him. He looked at it, then at her. And this time, his lips moved in clear, deliberate speech. Lena pressed her hand to her heart. Ayush. Rain pattered gently against the wide glass windows of room 9. Lena stood by William's bedside, her movements slow, almost reverent. His recovery was progressing, bit by bit, but his words still came in fragments, his voice thin and shaky. Across the room, Damien lingered by the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I want to show you something," he said quietly. Lena turned, surprised by the softness in his tone. Damien held out a file. It was thick, bound with a red ribbon, medical records, paternity tests, legal affirmations, no more gray areas. You're his daughter, and no board, no newspaper, no bloodline purist can take that from you now. Lena hesitated before reaching out, her fingers brushing his. "Were you doing this?" she asked. Damien shrugged, but there was a flicker of something vulnerable in his eyes. "Because he chose you, and maybe I understand why." She opened the file slowly. Inside was a document bearing her name. Her full name. Lena Mercy Ashcroft. It took her breath away. For years, she had buried it. For years, she had been Lena Cruz, the nurse who worked overtime and ate dinner out of vending machines. But now, the truth was inked in black and white. "It could have kept this buried," she whispered. Damien folded his arms. "So, could you?" She looked up. "Does it make you angry?" His jaw tightened. "It did. But now I think I was angry because I wasn't the only one he failed. Maybe we're more alike than I thought." Before she could respond, William stirred in the bed behind them. Lena rushed to his side. His hand rose shakily, his finger motioning toward the pen and notepad on his tray. He scribbled slowly, painfully. "Truth matters, even late." Tears welled in her eyes. Damien stepped closer, watching his father. "Is there more?" Lena asked softly. William nodded, then tapped the side of his head, then pointed toward the small bookshelf by the window. Lena walked over, her fingers trailing across the dusty spines until she saw an old, leather-bound journal. She brought it to William, who nodded weakly. Damien looked on in confusion. "What is it?" Lena opened the first page. Her heart skipped. Inside were entries dated over 20 years ago. William's handwriting. Dozens of pages describing moments with a woman named Rosa, Lena's mother. Entries about stolen afternoons, whispered dreams, promises never kept. At the center of it all was a name written over and over again. Mercy. "It's real," she whispered. "He never forgot us." Damien stared at the pages. "My mother never told me." "Probably never knew," Lena said quietly. "Or maybe she did, and she chose silence." William tapped her wrist. She looked down. He mouthed 2 words. "Forgive me." Lena blinked back the emotion in her throat. "I do. I always did. I never thought you'd come back." He lifted her hand and kissed it, slow, deliberate, a father's apology wrapped in frailty and time lost. A knock came at the door. It was Caldwell, the family attorney, briefcase in hand. "I've come to finalize the updated will," he said. "But there's one more thing." Lena stepped aside as he approached William. "He's a clause," Caldwell explained. "Mr. Ashcroft requested a final medical review before the board accepts his decisions as binding. It's protocol, due to the value of the estate." Lena frowned. "A test?" Caldwell nodded. "It's scheduled for tomorrow morning. Independent examiners." Damien's face darkened. "You think someone's trying to block it?" Caldwell hesitated. It's not unheard of. Lena turned to William. Are you ready for that? William didn't blink. He simply squeezed her hand and whispered. The next morning arrived wrapped in tension. The examiners, a team of 3 doctors and 1 neurological assistant, followed him into room 9 with clinical expressions and cold instruments. William sat upright, dressed in a cardigan Lena had laid out for him. His hair was combed, his hands rested firmly in his lap, and his eyes, though weary, burned with quiet fire. Lena stood behind him, one hand on his shoulder. Damien leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, watching every movement. The first test was physical, reflexes, coordination, muscle control. William performed each with deliberate effort, fingers trembling but obeying. When asked to lift a pen and write a sentence, he scrawled 6 shaky but legible words. "Please know what I want today." The second test was cognitive. They showed him photos of family members, CEOs, newspaper headlines. He pointed correctly to Lena's picture, then Damien's, then the Silver Grove logo. When they asked, "What is your daughter's name?" he didn't hesitate. "Elena Mercy." The room went silent. One of the doctors cleared his throat, clearly shaken. The final task, a memory test. "What year were you born, Mr. Ashcroft?" the neurologist asked. 1948, William rasped. After word a year. "What year did your daughter turn 5? A beat of silence. William blinked. Then, without help, he whispered, 2001. Lena clutched the back of his chair, her heart thudding in her chest. The doctors looked at one another, quietly murmuring. After another half hour, they collected their clipboards and nodded. "We'll file our report by this evening," the lead examiner said. "But from a preliminary standpoint, he's aware, alert, and competent." When they left, Lena exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Damien walked forward. He passed. She nodded. They can't fight it now, not legally. But the relief was short-lived. By afternoon, tabloid headlines exploded across the internet. Ashcroft fortune scandal. Secret doctor claims estate. If child or gold digger. Lena stared at her phone in disbelief. Someone had leaked the test results, twisted the story into something cruel and sensational. At Silver Grove, cameras began to gather near the gates. Paparazzi shouted questions. Reporters chased staff members. Lena had to sneak out the back door, with Damien driving her in his father's car. Back at her apartment, she sat in silence while Damien paced. "I'll call the PR team. We'll put out a statement." "No saint," she said firmly. "No spin, no polished lies. Let them talk. Let them guess. I don't care about their opinion." He stopped pacing. "But they're calling you." "A name doesn't define me," Lena said softly. "It never has. I'll show them who I am by what I do, not what they write." Damien watched her, something changing in his eyes. Respect, admiration, maybe even a hint of guilt for ever doubting her. Later that evening, William insisted on being wheeled into the Ashcroft Library, a room he hadn't visited in over a year. There, with Caldwell present, he signed the revised will. Lena sat beside him as he lifted the pen. The stroke still lingered in his fingers, but he managed. One signature, one name, one truth. "Lena Mercy Ashcroft," he murmured as he passed the paper to her. "You were never lost, just waiting." She held his hand again, no longer the nurse in room 9, but the daughter who had come home. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, but inside, for the first time in years, peace settled like dust over the legacy of a family once divided. The sky above Silver Grove was painted in strokes of lavender and deep blue as the evening settled in. On the rooftop garden, far from the sterile halls and echoing machines, Lena stood near the edge, her cardigan drawn tight around her shoulders. Wind caught wisps of her hair as she stared out across the city, lost in thought. Behind her, footsteps approached, quiet but familiar. Damien Ashcroft stopped a few paces away, holding 2 mugs of coffee. Without a word, he offered one to her. She accepted it with a quiet "thank you." They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything unspoken hovering between them like mist. "Sleeping peacefully tonight," Damien finally said, his voice softer than usual. "The nurses say he hummed when you held his hand this afternoon." Lena smiled faintly. "He used to sing that tune when I was little. My mother said it was the only thing that calmed him down after long meetings." Damien took a sip from his mug, then looked at her. "You know, I always felt like something was missing in my life. I thought it was ambition, maybe, or some bigger goal I hadn't found yet. But it wasn't. It was this, someone who reminded me who my father used to be, before the suits and the shareholders." Lena turned to him, her expression conflicted. "I'm not here to fix your memory of him." "Knows," Damien said. "But you did something none of us did. You saw him." She looked away, her gaze following the edge of the roof, the twinkling lights beyond. "I'm not staying, Damien. Once all of this settles, I'm leaving the Ashcroft name behind. Again. I plan to open a community clinic. Small, quiet. No reporters, no boardrooms, no heirs or titles. Just—" Damien didn't flinch. He didn't try to convince her otherwise. Instead, he pulled a slim envelope from his coat pocket and handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked, eyes narrowing. "Seed funding. No strings attached. A partnership if you'll have it," he said. "Let me help you build something that matters." Lena stared at the envelope, then him. "Why?" "Because you saved a man the rest of us forgot. And I think you're the only one who knows how to save more." Her fingers tightened around the envelope, trembling slightly. "I don't want to owe anyone anything." "You won't," he said. "This isn't a debt, it's a gift, for the people who never get seen." She nodded slowly, but then paused. "On one condition?" Damien tilted his head. "Name it." "We named the clinic after someone invisible." He blinked. "Like who?" "We need to know who the victim is," her eyes meeting his with quiet resolve. "We name it Mercy." Something flickered in Damien's gaze. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. The same name their father had written with trembling fingers. The same name their mother had whispered in the final days. A word that meant more than forgiveness. A word that meant remembrance. He stepped closer and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Mercy it is." The next morning, the rooftop looked different, brighter, more alive. The chill had softened into a crisp breeze, and the hum of early traffic below felt like the beginning of something instead of the end of something else. Lena stood near the railing again, this time sketching ideas in a worn notebook. Floor plans, room names, notes on grief counseling and low-cost care. She didn't hear Damien approach until he gently set a small velvet box beside her sketch pad. She stared at it, startled. "This isn't what you think," he said, both hands raised playfully. "Not a marriage proposal. Not yet." Lena arched an eyebrow but didn't touch the box. "Then what is it?" "Promise," Damien said, "that no matter what happens with the Ashcrofts, with the press, with the money, we'll build this together, as equals, as the people we chose to become, not the names we were born into." She hesitated, then slowly opened the box. Inside was a delicate silver ring, simple, elegant, the inner band engraved with one word, Mercy. Lena stared at it, her throat tightening. "You remembered." "I never forgot," Damien said softly. Tears shimmered in her eyes. "You don't know what this means to me." He whispered, "because I need this just as much as you do. Something pure, something that can't be bought." She slid the ring onto her finger, letting the moment settle between them. It wasn't an engagement, it was a foundation, a circle not just of metal, but of trust. "Used to think healing looked like a clean break," she said quietly, "like walking away from everything that ever hurt. But maybe healing is staying, choosing to grow roots in the ashes." Damien nodded. "Then let's grow them, together." A nurse appeared at the rooftop entrance, smiling brightly. "Sorry to interrupt, he's asking for you." Lena blinked. "William?" "More awake this morning. And he said your name." Lena and Damien exchanged a stunned glance. Without a word, they followed the nurse down the hall, through the familiar corridor to room 9. William Ashcroft was propped up with fresh linens and sunlight spilling across his blanket. His eyes, clearer than they'd been in months, fixed on Lena. He raised a trembling hand. Lena stepped forward, wrapping her fingers gently around his. His lips parted. "Alina," he rasped. Her breath hitched. "I'm here." And her thumb brushed her wrist. "Thank you for staying." She swallowed the knot in her throat. "You gave me the name, I only had to remember it." Damien stepped into the room behind her, silent but present. Watching his father and sister, two strangers once divided by lies, finally bridge the gap with something real. William glanced at him, then back to Lena. "Take care of each other." Lena squeezed his hand. "We will." And in that moment, something shifted. Not just in the room, but in the legacy of the Ashcroft name. It wasn't about power anymore. It wasn't about boardrooms or bloodlines. It was about mercy. About what happens when people stop running and start rebuilding. The sky over Silver Grove glowed pink as the first patients stepped through the glass doors of Mercy House. The name was etched in bronze just below a carved quote, "For those who were never chosen." Below it, in smaller letters read, "In memory of Elena's mother and all the invisible ones." Inside, sunlight poured through open windows and warm wooden floors replaced the sterile tiles of hospitals. The scent of lavender drifted from corners, soft music played quietly, and laughter echoed from the children's playroom. Nurses wore soft blue instead of white, and tea was offered before forms. Lena stood at the center of it all, clipboard in one hand, tea in the other. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose braid, and a small silver necklace bearing the letter E rested against her collarbone. Damien's gift, on the day construction finished. He had said, "Not for Lena Ashcroft, just Elena, whoever she decides to be now." William had lived long enough to see the foundation laid. On the final day of his life, he had asked to be brought in his wheelchair to the clinic's main hall. He had stared at the plaque for several long minutes before whispering the only words Lena would ever hear him say again. "Forgive me." Lena had squeezed his hand, pressing it to her cheek. "I already did." He died peacefully that night, his hand in hers, surrounded not by power or heirs, but by the one person he had once forgotten to choose, and who chose to stay anyway. His passing made headlines, but it was Mercy House that captured the public's heart. Photos of its cozy rooms and its mission grip, support, patient dignity, community care spread across social media. Volunteers poured in. Letters from grieving mothers, forgotten sons, estranged daughters filled the mailbox. Not all the Ashcrofts approved. Damien's uncles publicly challenged the new will and refused to attend the memorial. But others, quiet cousins, retired board members, reached out to Lena with trembling hands and softer hearts. One woman, once William's younger sister, wrote, "He should have named you first." Through it all, Damien remained by Lena's side. When reporters grew aggressive, he stood between them. When board meetings turned cold, he turned them warmer. And when Lena faltered beneath the weight of inherited legacy, he whispered, "You built something no dynasty ever could." Still, there were ghosts to tend to. One rainy afternoon, Lena drove to the cemetery where her mother was buried, under a simple stone marked Lena Cruz. She knelt in the mud, brushing away old leaves and placing lilies at the base. "Come here, Mama," she said softly, "not when it mattered most." But in the end, he did. A breeze rustled the trees as if answering. She stayed there until sunset, whispering stories of Mercy House, of children laughing in the halls, of the ring with the word mercy, and of Damien, how he had never called her Ashcroft, not once, not even now. Weeks passed, and spring found its way to Mercy House. One morning, as dew clung to the clinic's glass doors and birds chirped above the quiet street, Lena stood at the entrance with her usual cup of tea. She was reviewing the garden renovations when she noticed a young girl in a faded janitor's uniform walking past the gates. The girl couldn't have been older than 19. She had weary eyes and a mop bucket squeaking behind her. She paused outside the gate and stared at the building for a long moment, eyes drifting to the words, "For those who were never chosen." Lena stepped forward and gently opened the door. "You look like you could use a warm drink." The girl blinked, startled. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude." "Enough," Lena smiled. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be." She handed the girl a cup of tea, just like she used to make for herself in the early days, when the nights were long and the world had forgotten her name. Inside, staff and patients moved with quiet dignity. The girl sat in the waiting room, sipping carefully. A small smile tugged at her lips. From a corner office, Damien watched it all unfold. He stepped into the hallway, nodded toward the girl, and looked at Lena. "She reminds me of someone." Lena turned to him. "Me?" Damien shook his head. "No. The woman who stayed when no one else did. The one who taught me that legacy isn't blood or power. It's who you choose to lift." Lena leaned her head on his shoulder. In the months that followed, the young girl returned often, for tea, then to help clean, then to sit in group sessions. Eventually, she applied to be a volunteer. Lena guided her, just as she had once guided William through his silence and Damien through his doubt. On the first anniversary of Mercy House's opening, a ceremony was held under the blooming garden arch. Children painted stones for lost loved ones. Nurses shared songs. Damien read from a journal entry William had written in his "Saved me. She is mine, and if legacy means anything, let it mean her name." Lena spoke last. No grand speech, just quiet words carried on wind and memory. "I used to think forgiveness was a door I'd never find. But love, real love, it doesn't knock once. It waits, and when it finds you, it builds something stronger." She turned to the girl, now helping a patient into a chair. "When you're ready," she said to her gently, "you'll build something too." That night, Lena stood beneath the garden lights as Damien wrapped an arm around her waist. She looked out over Mercy House and whispered, "I'm not invisible anymore." Damien smiled. "No, you're the reason others see themselves." They walked together through the open doors, not as Ashcrofts, not as heirs, but as two people who had found something far more enduring than power or name. And they had found purpose. And, in the quiet hum of that evening, with stories being told and tea being poured, the legacy of a buried name rose, slowly, powerfully, and without shame. Because the name she once hid had become the name hundreds would now remember. Not for wealth or scandal, but for love. For mercy. For hope. For Elena.